listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to this October 22nd edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on today's storytelling journey. Our guest this week is Michael Alcazar. Let's find out more about Michael before we begin our conversation.
On today's episode of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Our guest this week is Michael Alcazar, who has over 30 years of experience in the New York City Police Department. He is now an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where he teaches courses on law and police science. He also specializes in hostage negotiation and criminal investigation, two of his core competencies as a former detective investigator. His mission is to educate and mentor the next generation of law enforcement professionals and contribute to the advancement of criminal justice. Let's meet this week's Stories from Real Life guest, Michael Alcazar, and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
Good morning, Michael, and welcome to today's storytelling journey.
Good morning, Melvin.
You spent over 30 years in the New York Police Department. Is the NYPD anything like the TV shows that we've seen?
Sometimes. I think most police officers will tell you that we don't really watch cop shows because they often get it wrong. Sometimes they get it right. It depends who they have helping in the TV shows and in the movies. A couple of my friends have done that. But for the most part, it's a little bit exaggerated. They get the names of the units often wrong. I want to say most of the time they get it wrong, and I just don't enjoy watching it. Because it's not a good facsimile of what crime happens, right? In TV shows, you often see crimes, homicides solved, within 30 minutes, and that's just not the case. They also glamorize the investigative part, and they don't show like the paperwork. You're pretty much behind your computer for hours, for days. And it's not as sexy as it looks. It's a lot of paperwork, a lot of answering phones and phone calls, a lot of interviews, and of course, eventually affecting the arrest, which is what they glamorize on these movies and TV shows.
All right. All that being said, is there any cop show or movie that you actually enjoyed watching while you were a police officer?
Yeah, there was a old show. Oh my God, what was it called? The one with Dennis Franz.
NYPD Blue.
NYPD Blue, yes. That was pretty good. That was a good representation of squad work, detective squad work. I was in the detective squad in Manhattan. Barney Miller's pretty good with the comedy and the rapport between the detectives. That's pretty accurate. There was an old movie, and I can't think of his name. With Kirk Douglas. Oh man, I can't think of the name of the movie, but it was. And when I I can't think of it. But that was pretty good too. And when I watch it, that was filmed like probably in the 60s, maybe even the 50s, and I'm sorry, I can't think of it. I could probably look it up. But the jargon that they use, even back then, we still use now. So that was pretty good. I thought that was pretty excellent. Not NYPD movie. I saw this movie, End of Watch, with Jake Gyllenhaal. I like that movie a lot. A lot of things that happen in that movie, of course, happens to the characters like in a 3-day span, but it does happen probably in a career of a police officer. I especially like that movie because it shows the camaraderie between two partners, mostly in, I don't know if you've ever seen it, in a patrol vehicle. And the partner is white and the other partner is Hispanic. And I've had partners that were, I'm Filipino and my partner was white. And I've also worked with a lot of females. So I like that, how they depicted that, because in the movie you see them learning each other's culture. And that's absolutely true. What happens, when you're sitting in a police car for 8 hours with a person that's not the same race, that's not the same background, it's not the same culture. And it's a good learning process. And I think it makes you a better police officer, because if you just work with the same race all the time, you're not going to learn about the world, the community that you serve. So I think that was, I especially like that movie, End of Watch. I thought that was really good.
All right. So how did you get into law enforcement in the first place?
So I'm the one and only police officer, detective in the family. No one else joined it. Nobody. My son, my kids didn't want to do it. And I don't believe my grandkids want to do it. Although my grandson has alluded to it. Of course, my daughter doesn't want to do it. But I was just a kid in New York, and I was going to college. And I've told this in my friend's podcast where, things happen, life happens. You look like you're about the same age as me, Melvin. As you know, we didn't have cell phones back then. Not too many video games, nothing to speak of anyway. Had no real hobbies, but I did have a girlfriend. So in college, I got my girlfriend in the family way. And another good friend said, hey, maybe you should. I was in my third year of college in Baruch College studying marketing management, of all things. And anyway, I had to take care of my family. I had to get a job that will support my family and provide good health insurance. So my friend suggested I take the test. That was in 1988. I took the test. And back then, it kind of what's going on now. It kind of mirrors what's going on now. Nobody really wanted to be a police officer because it was, it was the early 80s. It was very busy. And, I'm going to a college, for finance and business. And most of my classmates, were aspiring to work in Wall Street. The private industry was more attractive, of course, and people kind of looked down on policing. Like, why would you want to do that? I did it, and it was a whirlwind. I took the exam. I think within 6 months, I was processed. It happened so fast. Next thing you know, I'm in the academy faster than I expected. And, within a year, I was a police officer. And it turned out to be a pretty good career, so much so I did 30 years, but nothing I ever aspired to. And it turned out to something I love very deeply, very passionate about.
What does the term law and order mean to you?
Law and order. So law and order is supporting the community that you work for. I believe that to be good law and order, you should be a representative of the community. There should be, and they teach us this in the academy, and you learn this throughout your career, there shouldn't be an us versus them mentality. Police officers should remember that they are representing the community that they are a part of. They should never lose sight of that. We have to protect the citizens, right? We have to uphold citizens' rights. We have to do everything legally and to the best of our ability. We should never lose focus of that. Our main goal is to protect life and property, of course. And oftentimes, especially during the defund the police, I think the focus was lost. And again, police officers, I feel, took on sides, and of course, citizens too. And civilians were painted by police officers with the same brush, and civilians painted police officers with the same brush, meaning that, because a few police officers did not abide by their their creed, what they swore to do. Now all police officers are seen in the same light, and that's just not the case in my experience. And I know most people believe that police officers are corrupt, because I have friends that always bring this up to me. And I think that's when law and order is lost, when you don't have the support of the community, and the community doesn't believe that you're doing the job to the best of your ability, and that there's corruption. And I always tell my students, I teach at a college, John Jay, and I always tell my students that sadly, unfortunately, corruption will always be a part of policing, because no matter how much training, no matter how much oversight you have, police officers are human beings, right? And they'll always fall prey. Some will fall prey to corruption, because their moral standards are lower. I mean, I always tell my students also that who you are is what you bring into policing. So your family background, your friends, your upbringing, your religion, all these come into play, and of course your training. So yeah, law and order. I mean, I think the police officers are trying to do the best that they can right now, but I feel like we took a hit a little bit during defund the police. And anytime you have a corruption scandal, morale is always low. We always take a hit. We have to remain steadfast. Departments have to remain consistent in supporting the community and their police officers to have law and order. So that's my long answer to your question. Hopefully I answered it better.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So I have a question about this sort of same time thing. What do you think law and order means to politicians? Do you think it means the same thing it means to police officers?
I would hope so, right? I would hope that law and order is their priority. There's no doubt in my mind that there's good politicians out there that want to serve their community, but conversely, there's also corrupt politicians. And same thing with police officers. There will always be corruption in government, because they're human beings, right? The temptation is probably greater for them because they wield all this power. Recently, current events, we see that happening right now in New York City with the mayor and his administration and the massive resignations. And most people will believe that where there's smoke, there's fire. Some people believe that Mayor Adams will be arrested again, that there's more federal charges against him. So I know most citizens in New York are concerned that because of this investigation, that he might not be the best person right now, or his administration might not be the best people right now to make sure that New York City is safe, that all the services that New Yorkers expect are being, done to the best ability for the safety and the livelihood of New Yorkers. So, and they might be right? Who can do their work when there's so much other things going on? You are being investigated. How are you going to do your job to the best of your ability if you are being investigated, if you have your concerns? People are very, concerned about their self-preservation. So I think there is a major distraction right now in politics and in government. So it's definitely a huge speed bump for them. And time will tell. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if the politicians in play will be removed or if somebody else will take over. I rarely talk about politics too, by the way. I rarely talk about politics because I am a college professor. I know a lot of my colleagues do, and I think it's a disservice to the students. I don't want to influence, because we are people of influence, as professors. So I don't want to influence my students. I don't want to influence how to think. And unfortunately, a lot of academia does this, and we see this throughout the nation. I just present the facts. I give what's going on. I don't tell them how to vote because I don't think that's ethical. If you ask my students, they have no idea if I'm right or left. They don't know if I'm pro-police or against police because I talk about all the topics. I know they will attest to that. If you and I always say this, if you Google my name on Rate My Professor, you'll see what they say. And I try to maintain that because I think it's important because they're the future. I want them to make their own decisions for themselves, to form their own opinions. And I think by just walking right down that tightrope, they're smart. College students are smart. They'll figure it out. And, they don't need me telling them how to think, and they don't need other professors telling them how to think. They will figure it out as adults growing up in this world, in this city.
All right. So going from being a detective, law and order, or law enforcement for all those years, how was that transition for you to get in front of the classroom as a professor teaching criminal justice to the next generation of law enforcement officials?
Well, my background was I was a detective and I trained detectives. And let me tell you, the worst thing on the planet is training detectives because detectives have a lot of experience and you cannot tell them anything. They know everything. And I don't doubt that many of them do. A lot of the detectives I've trained are seasoned veterans and have a lot more experience and a lot more investigative experience. So I'm humble when I'm teaching them. It's an honor to teach them. Oddly enough, the detectives with the most time are the ones that are actually more patient and willing to learn and listen. It's the younger detectives, they're headstrong and, they're kind of like arrogant and they feel like they can't learn from anybody. So that was my experience, and you have to figure out a way to reach them. So one day I got to go back to how I became a professor. So because I dropped out of college, I got to explain it. I dropped out of college, right, to support my family. My mother, God rest her soul, always wanted me to finish my college. So when I had about, maybe 15, 16 years on the job, I never finished my college. I knew I was close to retirement at 20. I said, maybe I'll finish my college now, to honor my mom because it was very important to her that I got my degree. All my brothers and sisters had their degrees. So I wanted to do that. And John Jay had this program. They would give like 4 or 5 free classes to get you started for the NYPD, for fighters, FDNY. So I took that. So I did that. I'm older. I'm sitting with 18, 19-year-olds and I haven't been there in like 18 years. So it was definitely another learning curve for me. So I successfully got my bachelor's degree. And while I was on a roll, I figured I'll do my graduate studies. And when you're doing your graduate studies for your audience, most of the time you're presenting, right? It's not multiple choice. You do these projects and you do presentations. And one of my professors, who turned out to be the chair for law police science, asked me if I wouldn't mind teaching a class. Just out of the blue, she asked me, "You want to teach a class?" And I said, I train detectives. I'm sure I can teach students, young people. And I go, "When do you want me to do it?" And she says, "Oh, maybe like in 6 months." My professor was Mackie Haberfeld. She actually works for the police department now. She's a commissioner of training, recently appointed by Mayor Adams. So she goes, "Oh, maybe in about 6 months." And next thing you know, a couple of days later, "Do you want to teach in a couple of weeks?" I was like, "Mackie, I've never even taught a class." And she goes, and she had all the confidence in me, more confidence than I had. And she gave me a class, two classes, I believe, introduction to, policing or something. And that was back in 2012. It was great. I loved it. I actually loved it. I tell my students all the time, I love this more than policing. I love sharing my experience with you and, teaching you, because many of them did aspire to be police officers at the time. Sadly, that took a hit. Many of my students now do not want to be police officers, understandably. But I did enjoy it. Many of my colleagues also aspired to be professors once they saw me do it. Many of them were very qualified. Many of them were not. If they're asking me, how much does it pay? I would always tell them, well, maybe this isn't for you because, it's not about the pay. Your pay is from the NYPD. You're an active law enforcement. You make enough money there. You should want to do this. It should be more like a calling. I had lots of colleagues that also said that they got in and they're saying these students are stupid. And like, well, then, it's not for you. Maybe you shouldn't do it. If that's your attitude, it's about the money, that they're not intelligent, then it's not for you, and they left, they quit. So I've referred a few colleagues to be recommended to be police officers, and I vetted them carefully. They all went on to be very successful. And it's because I judge them on their character and I know they're going to care about the students. And I think that's key. I love teaching. I love it. I love it more than policing. I love my students, and they know that. And I always teach my students because my youngest one was also a college student, and I see what she's going through with the stress of colleges and the demands, and she was not confident that she was going to succeed. So I felt her concerns, and I wanted to transfer over to my students also. My students will tell you, I teach them just like I talk to them like I talk to my kids, because and I think they love that. They feel that I am a person that cares about their education and their future. Sadly, a lot of my colleagues don't. I hate to knock them, but so John Jay is an interesting college. For the people that don't know, John Jay College of Criminal Justice is in Manhattan. It is a criminal justice college. A lot of the students that go there aspire to be police officers, lawyers, anything in criminal justice. And we are divided with the professors. We have PhDs who are brilliant, have earned their degrees, lawyers and judges, right? Chemists, we have everybody there, linguists. And then there's us, the police officers. Oddly enough, I might be biased, I feel that we are the draw. The students love taking our classes because we teach from real life experience. They love that we are practitioners. And I was teaching, I was still active. I was an active detective, and they love that. Because again, at the time they aspired to be police officers. So they want to learn from somebody that's actually still doing it. They didn't want to learn from somebody that's all textbook and studies. They want to hear from somebody. And luckily, John Jay presents a lot of college professors that are police officers, detectives, sergeants, inspectors, chiefs. There's just a whole gamut of experience there. And I'm still friends with many of my students that have graduated. Many of them are now sergeants and lieutenants and detectives, and I'm still friendly with them. They still message me saying, professor, they still call me professor. It's funny, but they said that, what you said was true. I experience it now. I appreciate your candor and your truth. And because I knew that was going to happen. I'm not going to tell them something that's not true and then they become police officers. These are the future of New Yorkers. So I want to make sure everything was correct. And I just speak about experience and my experience. I remember this is a good one. I remember I was an undercover too, right? So I didn't talk about that. I was an undercover for 5 years. So I had a student, male black student, that this is so important. I still remember this because he took the police test and he was about to go into the police academy. And he goes that they approached him. The police department approached him to do undercover work before he even went into the police academy. And he was asking me for guidance, how he should proceed with this. And I said, well, and he was, this kid was like 21. I go, do you know what assignment you're going to do? He had no idea. He just knew it was undercover work. I said, are they going to promote you at the end of this to detective? Because you're going to do undercover work, you should get promoted detective because it's investigative. Where's your assignment going to be? I'm asking him the questions that I would ask if my son was approached to be an undercover, because you're a male black and they're asking you to be an undercover. You're probably going to go buy guns, buy drugs. It's going to be something dangerous. And I wanted to make sure he was clear on that. And I asked him, how does your family feel about this? How does your mother feel about this? Because you could just be a police officer, which is dangerous enough, and you don't have to be thrown into the underground economy, and make the same money. And if you're doing this and they're not promoting you the detective at the end of it, which they do, sadly, the police department is known to use and abuse you and throw you back to patrol. I would hate for this young man to do this undercover work for years and then boom, they just throw him back on patrol. So why did he do all that? That's, I know it's a good experience, but again, I was concerned for his safety. And years later, I ran into him. He's a detective, and he goes, I still remember what you said. I truly appreciate the advice you gave me. So I'm glad he succeeded. He apparently made the right decision. And that's the only thing I can do. Is I can hopefully just guide these students the right way if they choose to become law enforcement.
You're also a specialist in hostage negotiation.
Yes.
Is that as dramatic as the scenarios that we often see in movies?
It can be, right? It absolutely can be. So in the New York City Police Department, when I retired, I think there's more now, but when I retired, historically, they kept 100 hostage negotiators in the NYPD for the whole department. Luckily, there wasn't that many hostage jobs that we had to keep a dedicated unit, meaning that is all you do. You're a hostage negotiator, that's all you do. So hostage negotiators in the NYPD have their current assignment, and they also have a dual assignment as a hostage negotiator. So if I'm in the detective squad, actually, I was approached to be a hostage negotiator when I was night watch. Night watch is the detective squad for the overnights. So regular detective squads work day tours and 4 to 12s. Night watch works from midnight till 8 in the morning when all the silly business happens. So they were short of hostage negotiator, and a lot of hostage jobs happens on the overnight. So I was approached the first time to be a hostage negotiator when I was a night watch working midnights. So what you do as a detective is, say you're in special victims, right? You do rape cases and child abuse, and your dual role will be a hostage negotiator. Your job is to give your schedule to the hostage team so that if a hostage job comes up, say in Brooklyn, they'll know that, oh, Mike's working in Brooklyn today. He's working a day tour. Notify him for the hostage job. And they'll notify probably about 5 negotiators, ideally. Very often I've gone to a hostage job where it's just me or another person. So you're kind of like on call, right? So not only are you on call for 911, you're on call for a hostage job. I was trained by great detectives. One of them was Greg Giovanni, who's a senior hostage negotiator. And Greg will attest to it, and he puts it this way: you're lucky if you get a really good hostage job. When he says lucky, it means that you got a legit hostage job where, like, Greg has responded to a hostage job where it's documented on video. We saw it during the training where Greg had a male that was holding his nephew hostage with a gun. That's the kind of mindset that hostage negotiators might think about, like, oh, I got lucky, I got this job. I think most people will probably cringe. It's like, oh my God, I got this job. I don't want to do this. So many of my jobs were barricaded prisoners, EDPs, barricaded EDPs, domestic incidents where they don't want to open the door. So protocol is, when you have certain jobs like that, you have to have a hostage negotiator on standby. So you have police officers at the scene, uniformed police officers. You have the detective squad on the scene, you have emergency services on the scene, and then you have hostage negotiators on the scene. So there's always kind of like a conflict between emergency services and hostage, because hostage negotiators will talk to the person forever. We'll talk forever, hours and hours and hours. And I feel like, not a knock on emergency services, but I think emergency service just wants to get the job done. They want to take the door. They want to eliminate the threat, right? And of course, they step in if the hostage negotiation is not working well and the person is not cooperating and someone's life is in danger. And we absolutely need emergency services. Emergency services like our SWAT team, for people who are not familiar. They will boom the door. They have all the shields and all the toys, the shepherd's crook, the tasers, everything that you need to subdue somebody. So they probably dread it when we show up, because they know it's going to be a long day. Because our job is to talk to the person, hopefully make them, surrender peacefully and our goal is to preserve life. We don't want anybody getting hurt. We don't want the hostage taker getting hurt. We don't want the victim getting hurt. We don't want anybody getting hurt. So it's a lot of, again, like Greg said, you got to be lucky to get a good job. Many of my jobs were just talking behind the door, introducing myself, finding out what their issues are, what are their problems, what are their concerns, what do they want. And I can't tell you how many times we've resolved a situation by just offering them food, like a sandwich from the bodega, because they got hungry because it's hours later. And I get them a sandwich and say, hey, I get you food. Let's just come out, let's get you to the hospital. Let's talk about this, That's one of the things that hostage negotiators are known for. We have this phrase, talk to me. A negotiator, a female negotiator, I forget her name, coined it many years ago, talk to me. And that's often what we say, talk to me. I still use it to this day. When a director, a producer from Court TV says, hey, you think you do a story on this? And I'm like, yeah, talk to me. And it's just part of our lingo. So, yeah, I wish it was more sexy. I never got a job on the bridge. Most often bridge jumpers are dealt with by patrol officers, and we've had many police officers handle bridge jobs, building jobs, because they're the first responding officers, and then as you often resolve by the time we're deployed. So I've done hostage jobs in uniform. So it's not unusual for a police officer to be a hostage negotiator. They might not have the necessary training for that, but they have whatever training they have from the police academy to diffuse the situation. So I've talked to suicides on patrol, and basically convinced them to basically surrender and maintain their safety. So it's not as sexy as I wish I had great stories about how I rappelled off a roof. I have never done that, but most of the time our jobs were at the door, talking to them, being a human being, understanding their problems, and hopefully coming to a peaceful resolution. I've done a few like that. My friend Greg Giovanni has done more. He's awesome. He's my hero. And even he is humble when he's talking about it. And even he will tell you that most of the job is rudimentary, just being a human being and talking at the door. It's not like I'm sure it happens a lot in real life, but not always. Not what they glorify, in like Samuel Jackson movies. So thank goodness, it's just being a human being and just caring about somebody and resolving the situation as peacefully as possible.
How much of a problem is organized crime in New York City?
So, yeah, it's a big problem, and I feel like it's come back because organized crime are detective investigators and undercovers. I worked in OCCB as an undercover for 5 years. Remind me to talk about the politics of that too. But right now we are so short in police officers, right? I think when I retired, we had 40,000 police officers in the NYPD. Right now they're saying that we're down to 35,000 police officers. But I heard from a colleague who's still on the job that the real number is about 25,000. And that's concerning because we can't get police officers, right? We heard about the mass migration of police officers retiring or going to other police departments. And of course, this stems from defund the police, right? Police officers weren't getting the support from the community. They were all being targeted, even the good police officers, sadly. I mean, I can see the anger from the community. It's justified, but their sights were set on the wrong police officers. We can't think all police officers are corrupt because many of them, 99% of them, are doing the job to the best of their ability, and we're sadly painted with the same brush. And morale is an all-time low, I think, and police officers are. Many of them are retiring if they can, if they have, if they've done their 20 years. Actually, now they change it to 22 and a half. So if they reach that milestone, many of them are leaving and perhaps going to other police departments. So right now, because we're understaffed, many of our investigative functions are suffering because, like I have a friend right now, he's a detective, but because of the shortage of police officers, he can't conduct his investigation, so he's on patrol. So they're putting him wherever the crime spike is happening, wherever the shootings are happening, wherever the violence. So we're dealing with street crime, not investigative crimes, right? We're doing street crime, shootings, muggings, robberies, assaults. So he is being deployed, and many of my other colleagues are being deployed in the different boroughs, and it's not the nice areas, right? It's going to be the areas where crime is spiking. So because of that, undercovers are not able to do their work. Investigators are not able to do their work. Recently, we saw in Washington Square Park where drug dealing it's just open air drug dealing, right? Because there's no fear. There's no more detectives. There's no undercovers. We see on Roosevelt Avenue, if you're from, I don't know if your people are familiar, your audience, Roosevelt Avenue in Queens is now overwhelmed with street prostitution, right? And I know people will say that, they're just sex workers. They're just trying to do, support themselves. I understand that. I totally understand that. But many of these sex workers are also being abused. They're being trafficked. They're paying, they're like indentured servants. They're paying off their travel to come to the United States. So they are also victims. They probably don't want to be sex workers. So all this is happening right now. It's out of control. As an undercover, when I was in the 90s and in the 2000s, I feel proud that we cleaned up, the prostitution area, the sex worker, got them the help that they needed, got them off the street, and it's back in full swing. So, open drug deals, prostitution. My concern is it's just going to hurt the community. It's going to, they're just walking around and young people are seeing this. Kids are seeing this like it's the norm. It shouldn't be. And again, we're just suffering a lot. And that's New York City, right? We are a fairly large department with a large base of police officers. I can only imagine what's happening in smaller agencies when they don't have it. And they don't have, I'm in Pennsylvania, and some of our police departments are like 3-man police departments. How are you going to, police a community with only 2-3 police officers? So it's concerning that investigative units are suffering, and apply that to the bigger picture, the whole nation, and I feel like it's going to be something that will reflect badly. And additionally, we can't recruit police officers. So, Melvin, when I came on, my academy class was like 2,100 candidates. Right now, they're struggling to put 300, 400 police officers, right? So that means they're basically scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? The more qualified candidates are not applying, and they might be overlooking certain things in the background when they're doing background investigations on these candidates. They might be overlooking certain things, and I hate to say that lesser qualified candidates might be coming into policing, and I think that we will see that in like 5 years. We'll probably see a lot of corruption. I hate to be Kreskin and predict this, but we'll probably see more corruption because we're getting less qualified police officers.
How much are racial and social justice issues discussed within the police department, and how are those things handled?
So we do have training for that. Of course, when defund the police happened, we were already under federal, what's the word I'm looking for? Not federal watch, but federal monitoring, right? Because of the abuse of stop, question, and frisk. So that's when we started using body cams to document it. Oddly enough, stop, question, and frisk is the reason we started documenting all the paperwork for the people that we were stopping and questioning. And that showed that a bulk of the stops that we were doing were, of course, people of color. And that's why we're under a federal monitoring for the body cams. So the training that we get is, of course, for de-escalation and sensitivity. We have equal employment offices that investigate any kind of allegations of racism or targeting individuals, not only for the police department, for civilians. Actually work in that office for about 3 months. And of course, now that I've retired, I hope it's continuing, especially under the Adams administration. I hope there are policies in place. I know they revamped the stop, question, and frisk. It's still it's still in play. Stop, question, and frisk is a valuable tool we use in police department if done correctly. I know they revamped the training for that so that the police officers can understand that, you can only stop people for certain offenses and you cannot target racially, right? And I always talk about that too, because I always ask my students, can you target people criminally? And right away, I think they don't have the full understanding and say, oh no, you can't target anybody criminally. I said, well, that's policing, right? We target criminals. I didn't say racially target somebody. You have to be able to identify criminals, right? If somebody's walking around a store and just looking around for cameras, or they're wearing like a heavy coat during the summer, right? You have to identify criminals. And I think that's part of the retraining, especially for police officers. I think many of the police officers right now are apprehensive to do police work because they're afraid that they're going to do the wrong things. And I think that's where the training is valuable. It's got to be constant. It's got to be more than twice a year. It's got to be ever evolving. And I think, talking to the community and attending community meetings, which we have with our neighborhood coordinating officers, right? This is important that the community understands that we're there to serve them, to protect them, and we're not the enemy. And it's also valuable for police officers. I train police officers. I train NCOs, the neighborhood coordinating officers, that they should interact with the community, how to talk to the community. And it's invaluable, especially if you're not from the city. Like, I'm a city kid. I grew up in the city. Working in New York City was fine. This is normal to me. I've seen open hydrants before, right? I've seen people barbecuing on their fire escapes. This is totally normal to me. But sadly, that's not normal to police officers that lived in Westchester or lived in Long Island where they have big lawns. To them, this is like, what is this? These people, they're not doing the right thing. This is our backyard. The sidewalk is our backyard. The hydrant is our pool. And you need that. And again, talking about the movie earlier, I worked with a partner that lived in Long Island, grew up in Long Island. He just didn't understand it. We're driving one day on a city street. I see the water gushing from between cars. I told him, look, slow down, slow down. He's probably thinking it's just a defective hydrant. I said, slow down. And he slows down. And sure enough, this kid's playing at the hydrant, right? And he just didn't get it. He didn't understand it. He wasn't exposed to that growing up. So I think it's valuable for police officers to interact with the community and to hear their concerns. And this is the thing, right? When you're a police officer, you're going from 911 call, and it's always something bad. You're going to an assault, a domestic, a robbery, a burglary. It's always bad. And then some police officers get conditioned to see that they're only dealing with bad people. And then they start, and again, talking about painting people with the same paintbrush, they paint that community with the same paintbrush. These people are all criminals. They're not, right? Just because you're exposed to only bad events, that doesn't mean the whole community is bad. Same thing, if you're only exposed to bad corruption in policing, that doesn't mean all police officers are corrupt. So I think it's so important that you have to interact with the community. Go to the churches. I work with a black police officer, and she took me on Sundays. I've never done this. She took me to the church, and in the church after service, they had like a barbecue meal, and we sat there, and I was welcome there, and I talked to the community. See, I wasn't privy to that. She introduced me to that. So I think if the police department does that on the regular and make police officers know the community, know that Hispanic community, know that black community, know that Muslim community, know their culture, know their practices, I think that's key. Diversity is key. Speaking from, of course, a police officer, myself of color, it's invaluable. And you can teach other police officers about their culture, your culture. I can learn from their culture. So I think that's a big part of it. I know they hit a little bit of a speed bump with defund the police, and a lot of citizens are hesitant to talk to police officers, but we just got to keep trying. No one really likes the police officers. Everyone loves firemen, right? Police officers, all they think about is us pulling them over, writing summonses, arresting them. But they don't see the good that we do. No one ever talks about the good that we do. When I used to play basketball in the schoolyard with the kids, or just checking on the kids, walking around, asking them how was school. This is neighborhood policing, which has been in practice forever, or the life you saved, or the fire rescue that you did. Nobody puts that on the news, but they only put the bad. And then if you put the bad, people think that's all we do is the bad. And that's just not the case. A lot of heroic efforts, a lot of normal, everyday human efforts are put forth by police officers, and same thing with the community. Community is good, right? They're not all bad. They're not all criminals. They are hardworking people. And when police officers see that, they understand. They realize, okay, I needed that. They needed to decompress and see that this is the community I serve. And it kind of like restarts them, right? There's no counseling for police officers. There isn't. They say there is. And if there is, it's probably... it comes with a negative stigma, and police officers don't want to do it. Usually it's volunteer, right? I don't know if people understand this. When you respond to a shooting, or if you get into a shooting, or if you see a crime scene and there's dead bodies, people shot, there's no seeing a psychiatrist after that. Most police officers deal with that by themselves or within their own, with other police officers. That's how we decompress. That's how we deal with it. And most of us, and we can't take it home. I can't talk about the crime scene that I just saw and tell my wife, my girlfriend, your husband or your children. You can't share that. Many police officers deal with that by talking with other police officers, or worse, they bottle it up, And can you imagine what does to you psychologically? So there's a lot of things going on there. And again, training, counseling, Talking to the community is a big part of how to serve a community, learning from each other. And I think that's how you deal with any kind of racial tension. So that you know who you're serving and the people know who's serving them. And I think for the most part, the New York City Police Department does a very good job of that. And they have to maintain that. Hopefully they can maintain that even with the shortage of police officers. Hopefully.
Which part of your job has caused you to lose the most sleep over your career?
Oddly enough, the most stress, and I think most of my colleagues will agree, is probably stress that the department puts on you. If there's like, if let's talk about quotas, right? Quotas is a dirty word. The department will say there's no quotas, right? Right now, they're saying there's no quotas. And I believe there are no quotas because they actually put it on paper. They put it on training that's illegal for supervisors to request quotas, meaning to expect a certain amount of activity, summonses, arrests. Right now, it's on paper. It's illegal. But back in the day, when I was a police officer, there was 100% the unspoken rule of quotas, meaning you were expected to write a book of summonses, which is about 25 summonses, and 2 arrests, right? Monthly. So there's that pressure. I've seen police officers, there's documentaries about police officers that suffered through this, that they were targeted because of quotas and not making arrests. And that is stressful. That's more stressful than anything, that you're in fear of being reprimanded or losing your job or losing your assignment. Right off the top of my head, I think that's probably the most stressful. Let's see. I'm sure. Yeah, personally, for me, that was stressful too. When a supervisor was targeting you because of personal issues, because he didn't like you, because you're not part of his clique. And that happens a lot. There's a lot of politics going on in policing that no one talks about. For the most part, dealing with crimes and crime scenes, and I'm sure some police officers can't deal with it, but I think the majority of police officers deal with it because we talk to each other about it and we walk each other through it and guide ourselves through it. And that's how we become really like a tight-knit family. I always said that when you work in a busy command, meaning there's a lot of crime, that's always the best police officers. That's the tightest camaraderie. And to this day, I'm retired like 5 years now, and I haven't worked with those guys in like over 30 years, and they're still family. I still get together with them. That's how you deal with stress. I'm sure the first time I saw a suicide, the first time I saw a dead body, that was stressful, and I probably had to deal with it, because you've never seen anything like that. But, over 30 years, I've seen so much, and sadly you become numb to that, whether you deal with it by yourself or with some kind of psychological help. I would say that most police officers don't deal with that better, and it's not so stressful. As I'm talking about this, of course, I just realized, of course, the most stressful time was during 9/11. Because I lost colleagues there, personal friends, people that I work with. Of course, that's the most stressful. That was probably the most stressful. To this day, I don't like watching movies about 9/11. I hate 9/11. I hate that day. I don't like watching the reading of the names. I don't watch movies about it. I don't read books about it. So when I lived in the city and I'm in my apartment, I hear planes going overhead, I would get a little bit of a panic, and they did give us psychological help for that as a group, not individually. And of course, we put on this false bravado that we're fine. This was like maybe 5 years later. And I remember me and my team going there, and we're all seeing a psychiatrist and talking about it. And most of the men, we say we're fine. And I think most of us are fine. But I remember one of my female colleagues, and we had no clue. She didn't even share it with us. She just broke down and started crying about those days, that event. and how she was worried for her husband, who was a detective, also deployed at ground zero along with all of us. She didn't know where he was, and she was concerned, and it's real. Yeah. To answer your question, that was probably the most stressful time. We were there from day one. We were there. It wasn't even a rescue effort. It was a cleanup effort, as we know now. Not many bodies were recovered. We went to the Staten Island dump to recover any kind of evidence. That was very stressful. Even to this day, I did not enjoy that. That was probably the worst assignment, sifting through the dirt in the landfill, finding body parts. This is the weirdest thing, Melvin. The first day I was assigned there was a table, like just a folding table, and it said no body parts on this table. And I thought it was a joke, right? Really? Is this, we have gallows humor anyway. So I thought maybe that was a joke, but they were serious. No body parts on the table to preserve it. It had to go in a certain location. So I didn't expect that. And then as police officers, we're not trained. We're not medical examiners. We don't have a medical background, and we're sifting through dirt, right? That they recover from ground zero, transferred over to the Staten Island landfill. We never had training for this, and we're sifting through dirt looking for evidence. And very often you'll find body parts, hair. I think that's not normal. That's pretty stressful to deal with, and you're not trained for that. And they don't tell you what you're going to find. I mean, they think you have there's an expectation you might find that, but you never think that. I remember sifting through the stuff and finding body parts, and the thing that hit me the most was a Christmas ornament that I guess they had in storage in their office that they were probably planning to hang that day. And I remember seeing this Christmas ornament, and I think I just broke down right there. It became very real for me that these people had plans, and it's not going to happen. And that was probably the most stressful. I don't watch any of that stuff. I was an undercover at the time in organized crime, and I definitely didn't. Yeah, we were there for months, and I did not enjoy that. I did not like that assignment at all.
Wow, I don't even know how to follow that up. Wow, that's really tough. So we're winding down this conversation. Let's try to end on a positive note here. So, what are you the most optimistic about with law enforcement in the country in general, the country as a whole?
I'm optimistic that I know there's people out there that are dedicated, that want to be police officers, that aspire to be police officers. Unlike me, there's actually people out there that plan to be police officers because it's a calling for them. Maybe something happened in their life and they want to straighten it out. They want to be a better police officer. I always tell my students that if you don't like what's going on now in policing and what you're seeing, you could be that change. You could be that person, and you can make it right. You are, again, I always stress them, you are a representative of your community, of your family, of your mother and father. And remember that when things get hard and things get challenging, just always go back to that. Think about who you're representing and make them proud. Be strong, with your moral fortitude. Never lose sight of that. And I always tell that to my students because, oftentimes you fall into this police subculture and, you might lose sight of your initial goals and, what you wanted to achieve as a police officer. So I know there's always people like that. I'm hoping for better leadership. If it turns out the current leadership is not on the up and up, I'm hoping for better leadership. I'm hoping for better government to help straighten out our nation and our cities. Police officers are the end all be all, it seems like it. We can't do it all. We need the help of the community. We need the help of government, local government. So I know there's good people out there, and that's what I believe that there are good people out there that will right the ship when it's wrong, and We can always rely on that. People are good, and they will fix it.
Our guest today has been former New York Police Department detective and John Jay Professor Michael Alcazar. Michael, thanks so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed this conversation. I've definitely learned a lot.
Thank you, Melvin. Thanks for the opportunity.
If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this podcast so that you never miss an episode, and please share it with a friend. I'd greatly appreciate that. That's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.